I'd like you all to welcome author and activist Elaine Brown.
I feel like I adopted, I guess I'm going to turn this thing on. Hold up. Okay. Is that better or worse or whatever? I'm very loud, so it won't require much, you know. I'm from the hood. You have to speak loud in the hood in order for anybody to pay any attention to anything you have to say so you don't get killed. But thank you very much for coming out tonight. I figure there's not a hell of a lot to do here in Sonoma other than drink wine, and I know it's illegal for most of you to drink wine, so you have to resort to smoking weed. But, oh, that's right. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. But you can't drink any wine in the wine country, so you can go to Iraq and kill some people, but you just can't drink any wine, you know. You can go to Iraq and get killed, but you can't drink any wine. And if you're 17, you can't even vote. Isn't that an amazing concept? But in any case, and that kind of goes to what I really want to talk about, and we're going to do question and answer. But I want to talk a little bit about what is going on in this country in terms of not just the history of the Black Panther Party, but I'm sure most of you know very little about the Black Panther Party other than that it could be like the opposite number of the Ku Klux Klan or some kind of black terrorist organization or whatever. You know, it's like Martin Luther King's dream. He had a dream. We don't know what it was. Something about children walking up a mountain holding hands. We don't know what the hell Martin Luther King's dream was. We barely remember that he had a dream. We just know he was nonviolent. That's the main thing that we think about when we think about Dr. King, and we always want to put that forward. But I think the real question is, what kind of a society are we living in, and what kind of society do we want? This evening at dinner, most of us were talking a lot about health care in America because, you know, there's a notion that we should all have health care insurance when the real issue is we should all have health care as opposed to insurance, because I'm not that worried about insurance as I am about living and dying and so forth. And then some people will tell you, well, you know, I don't know, some people probably saw the Michael Moore film Sicko, which I didn't see, but I lived in France, so I can tell you that there was health care available to every single person for free, basically, or for a very minimum amount. And then people say, well, isn't that socialized medicine, as though that's a meaningful term. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. The bottom line is when you're dying and you have breast cancer or prostate cancer, or you, as poor Mo's nephew tonight almost lost his arm in a terrible construction accident, you're not worrying about whether it's socialized medicine, insurance, anything else. You want somebody to hurry up and come to you and give you some assistance right now. You are not looking for an entertainer or a basketball player or a rapper or anybody else. You need a doctor, and you need one now. And if you don't have the money, your life is in danger. And so in France, one of the countries in the world that most of the Western European countries, though, do have free, what is effectively free health care, because the people made a decision they'd rather spend their $10 billion a month not on a war in Iraq, but perhaps on health care and education for the people ourselves. So the question becomes, what kind of a society do we want, and how does that relate to race in America today, and so forth. And that's what I want to talk about. You know, Jean-Paul Sartre, and I know some of you are studying, is there philosophy courses anymore? I don't even know. Sort of cut that out of it. Let's not do any real thinking, you know. Let's just learn some stuff to be on track to get a job, you know. And we don't have to know anything that doesn't go to the job question, you know. We don't even have to know anything about our own history or anything else. But Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a French philosopher in the 20th century, effectively, said, hell is a place where by design nobody gets his needs met. That's a heavy statement, isn't it? In other words, if you really think you're in hell, hell would be that place where when you want some food, you can't get it. When you want some water, you don't have it. When you need a place to live, or you need the things that you need as a human being are denied to you by design. In other words, it's never going to happen. You can't even work your way out of it. You can't do the right thing and all of that. So that by design, in the scheme of things, hell is a place where, by design, nobody gets his needs met. I think that we want a place where, by design, everybody gets his or her needs met. And so the question is, how can we? I don't think anybody wants to walk around and say, well, this is a country in which so many people go to bed hungry or really just die of malnutrition or disease or anything else because of money, because we don't have the money to pay for it. And we tend to think that we need money And that what's wrong with that? You know, it's like, why do these people they're lazy, they're not working, so forth and so on. But as soon as you get into an accident and can't work, or as soon as you find yourself unable to work or what have you, then you begin to understand the relationship, and you sort of become an enlightened person and realize that my interest is connected to your interests, because if something should happen to me and I should be denied and find myself in that position, I want to create the conditions or the design for everyone to get his or her needs met. Now, today in the United States, we have the highest incarceration rate in the world, right? In the world. This is an incredible concept when you think about it, because this is a country that's talking about Iran and, countries like Darfur. We're crying and carrying on about all these places in the world and how barbaric these other people are, I remember when Timothy McVeigh was ultimately caught in connection with that Oklahoma federal building bombing. But before he was caught, a bunch of people were walking around talking about, I think it was some Arabs that did this. It's like they looked like some black Muslims. I mean, really, these were reports that were coming out of Oklahoma City at the time. Nobody thought it was going to be little Opie going bad, So here comes this little red-headed all-American guy who has blown up the building. But the point is that there was a notion that it had to be somebody, some foreigner or something, because we had this kind of other attitude. But we're in a country where we're criticizing all these other countries around the world. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. And of those over 2 million people in prison in America today, 50% are black. 50% are black. And so, black people represent only 13% of the American population. So there's a big disparity between our numbers, our ratio of blacks in prison and the ratio of blacks in the country. So the question becomes, why? And people go, I remember a guy, district attorney of the county of DeKalb County in Georgia, where I live. I don't live in DeKalb County, I live in Georgia, who said that one of the reasons why most of the people that he prosecuted as young children being prosecuted as adults were black boys is because they were the only ones committing crimes, and really felt that made sense to him. And so then people start asking questions like, well, why is that true, that black people are in prison? I mean, they're out there committing all these crimes. And so there's no analysis. And so we start going off into, well, let's stop all the black on black crime, and let's just stop the black criminals and the gangsters and all of this stuff, as though this has any reflection of any reality. And it has no reflection. The biggest amount of crime is actually committed by white people against white people. It's just the bottom line. A lot of white people in America, so it's a lot of white on white crime, right? If we want to call it that. There's there's hardly anybody thinks in terms of white on black crime, and black on black crime has become this new thing, and black on white crime is the death penalty, so we know what's happening with crime. But we never even think to ourselves, well, crime is really a political question. We think crime is a moral question. We think of it as, if you kill somebody, you go into the joint. That's who's in the prison right now, people who kill people. But you can kill somebody with impunity in this country, of course. Somebody comes into your house, looks like they want to steal some of your clothing or your items, or looks like they might want to harm you in some way, you can blow him away right there. Matter of fact, if you blow him away at the door, you can just, as long as that foot was in the door, or hand was in the window, you're walking away. Self-defense is a complete defense under the laws of the United States, am I right? So, you can kill. So murder is not a crime, it's only a crime sometimes. So if your name is Colin Powell and George Bush I tells you to go to Panama and arrest Noriega, remember that one? The drug dealer who also went to the School of Americas in Georgia and was trained by the CIA. If he tells you to go to Panama and you do what Colin Powell did, said arrest Noriega, he says, okay. He put all these troops on the ground, helicopters coming in, Black Hawks landed off in Panama. We weren't at war with Panama. We were trying to arrest, quote unquote, Noriega, who everybody knew was dealing drugs for a long, long time before the day that he was arrested, or so-called arrested. And in the process of arresting Noriega, who ended up in a Catholic church, and so Colin Powell didn't want to bomb the Catholic church. Had it been a mosque, we might have found out something different, but it was a church. He said, I'm not going to bomb the church now. So Noriega came out with a little white flag, and he said, look, don't you see these pictures of me and Bush? We're here. And he had pictures. They showed it at trial. I mean, this is not like the Black Panther conspiracy myth from the 60s. This is a real photograph, Bush. And so So Noriega gets arrested, but in the process of arresting Noriega, over 5,000 Panamanian people get killed by American troops. We don't even know about these people. They're just some Panamanians sitting in Panama City in Panama. We don't even remember them. Nobody says Colin Powell is a mass murderer. Nobody says he's got blood on his hands. That's illegal. We think that's all right. Matter of fact, we're really not even thinking about it. I don't know anybody in a joint anywhere who has killed 5,000 people. But he's not a mass murderer. He's just a good guy that went in there and got Noriega. And when asked about, don't you feel you used excessive force, Colin? General Powell, don't you feel like killing 5,000 people was a bit much to arrest one guy? He said, I don't deal with numbers, I deal with results. And now he's talking about volunteer America. So we see Colin Powell on the cover of Ebony magazine, and we see that he's a hero. He's not a murderer, even though all these people died. And they were not our enemies. They had not even charged with having weapons of mass destruction. But they're dead as sure as we're sitting here. So we have to first understand that how did it come to be that we misunderstood the whole concept of crime? So we think all these people sitting in the joint are criminals. So naturally, we're satisfied that 50% of the people in prison are black because they must be committing crimes. But we don't even know what crime is. So this is what this is about, to talk a little bit about this. I want to say this because I did write a book called The Condemnation of Little B, and so I want to use the Little B story as exemplary of what I'm talking about when I talk about the concept of what I call New Age racism, which is that we're happy, we as a society, I don't just mean white people, I mean black people. You know, Henry Louis Gates, who is a head of African American Studies, whatever it's called now at Harvard University, says that there are two nations of black America. There are the good black Americans, like the Cosby, you know, like Cosby talks about how Shaniqua and Chantrine and them, they don't like those people from the hood, you know. And Cosby's the good black father, and then there's the rest of them, you know, the people that wear the, you know, that sag and do rap songs and, you know, sell cocaine and, you know, the gangbangers and that kind of thing. Those are not, they're not really part of that other black America, and they need to, something needs to happen to them. So there's this notion that there must be something wrong with these are the bad people that need to go to prison, and that's how we ended up with this number of people in prison. So I want to talk a little bit about this boy, Little B. Little B was born in 1983, and he was, by the time he was 8 years old, in Atlanta, Georgia, in an area called the Bluff. And by the time he was 8 years old, his house was the crack house. So that means that all that went on in that house was crack selling, crack use, and that's it. And as he told me, his mother smoked up the crack, smoked up the water, smoked up the electricity. In other words, everything got turned off so that all money could be diverted to the use of crack. And we like to talk about these kind of dysfunctional black families and say, well, look at this woman, she's out here selling her body or whatever she's doing to getting welfare to buy crack, which she was doing, absolutely all of that. And as a matter of fact, I like to remind people that when Little B, at this moment, probably doesn't know anybody that he grew up with that ever had a job. Can you imagine just like having no relationship to anything in the country except for everybody in his neighborhood is either selling or using dope? And it was a kind of neighborhood where, you know, people say, well, you know, the problem with black people today is, and the reason you have such bad health problems is that you're just not eating enough fruits and vegetables. You cannot be a vegan in the Bluff, okay? Because you will die. You can go to the corner store and you can buy some potato chips, and you can buy some yak hair in a package that you can weave into your hair, you know. And you can buy some weed, and you can buy a beeper and a phone card, but you cannot, and maybe some bad milk for 4 times the price of everything else, but you cannot buy any tomatoes or lettuce or anything. There's no Whole Foods in the hood, in other words. And even if there were, nobody could afford it. That's why people go to Popeye's Chicken and their children grow up learning that they want to know McDonald's combo 1, 2, or 3 and don't know anything about real food or anything else. So that's the neighborhood that Little B grew up in. There's no movie theaters there. There's no library there. There's no park that's safe except for because everybody in the park is shooting up, smoking up, or whatever else. It's just a rough situation. And so when Little B grew up, by the time he was 11, his mother was declared unfit. Well, he was declared a deprived child. And as a deprived child, he was taken from the mother's home. Not that she actually had a home, but he was taken from whatever it was And he was going to school every day up until that point because he and his sister went to get that free breakfast and lunch, at school. When people who are teachers sometimes say to me, well, these kids don't even want to listen in class. Now, you are living in the crack house. You get up every morning from somewhere in a corner, and it's 12 people laying around high. You got to walk over there, and there's no water in your house. You got to go up the street to do all these kinds and you want me to do my math homework. You were telling me I should be more responsible, and my parents aren't taking care of me, and all this sort of thing. So when I met Little B, so by the time he was 11, he was put into a group home, and in the group home it was horrible. So he ran away and ran back to what he knew, which was in the Bluff, and what he knew was all that he could do to survive was sell dope for his brother. His brother was like 17, 18 years old. Brother been selling dope for a long time, so he started selling dope so he could have enough money to eat. I asked him one time, I said, so what did you do for dinner? And even that was a middle-class question. The notion of dinner wasn't even in his frame of thinking. Like, I get enough money to eat today, and that's, what I do, and I go and I buy food. And so he lived for the next 2 years on the street by himself, hustling here, hustling there. And I said, Michael, his name is Michael Lewis. I said, Michael, you were homeless. He said, no, I was never homeless. I always had somebody's house I could go to and sleep. And so in his mind, he was just wandering the streets, never went back to school. He was arrested at 13 years old for a murder that first of all, it's not really important, but I just think I should say that he didn't commit this murder. It was a dope killing. Guy rolled up to the store, got blown away because he owed the dope man. If you owe the dope man and you go to the dope man's house, you better have some money on you. Life is cheap on the range, You can get killed if you owe somebody some money for some dope because they have to make a point to everybody else that might owe them some money. But that wasn't Michael. He didn't do that. But other people that knew him did. And so they set him up as a kid thinking that he wouldn't get any time. And he was so naive and young and so beholden to all the dope boys in the neighborhood who were older, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And they put him in the joint, and he ended up getting convicted of this murder. I went to see about him because this was such an incredible case to see this little boy's face, this 13-year-old child. He was so little. And the whole of Atlanta, they call Atlanta Black Mecca. It's not really. They call it Black Mecca because the idea is like Mecca, but it's like Black Mecca. And it's sort of some place where it's a wonderful place for black people. I mean, it's ludicrous to call it that because it has nothing to do with any promised land or anything else for blacks. But the blacks who were in Atlanta, who were a part of the hierarchy, that other nation of Black America, they condemned Little B right away when he was arrested. This is a bad boy. This is exactly the problem in the black community today. All these bad boys and gangsters running around here killing each other, and he killed a good father. They didn't mention that the good father's up there owing the dope man, but that's another story. So he said he killed a good father and killed him in front of his kids. And this is what's wrong with black people today. All these bad boys growing up in this neighborhood and hurting our people. Like, otherwise we would be living on streets paved with gold, but for these bad black boys, you see. Now, around the same time, there was a kid in Eugene, Oregon, a white kid named Kip Kinkle. And Kip Kinkle got up one morning in Eugene, Oregon, just outside of Eugene, Oregon, and killed mom and dad, okay? And stuffed them underneath the house and wired the house with some explosives. I don't know where Kip got all these skills from, but nevertheless, he did it. And this is not a question. This is not like, oh, he didn't do it. He did all of this. And then he went off to school with a backpack. You probably know the drill. Had the guns in the backpack, had an assault rifle in his hand, arrives at school, shot up 25 people before they took him down. Kip was a little kid, too. So I was kind of surprised it took that long to take Kip down. But by the time, 3 of those people died. So that day he killed 5 people and wounded the rest, 20-some other people. And everybody was like, oh, my gosh, this is horrible. This is so horrible. And the next day at the school, at the middle school, there was a big banner out in front of the school. And it sort of represented what people were thinking around America at the time, because I guess it was after Columbine. I can't remember when Columbine was anymore, but it was, I think maybe it was before Columbine. But anyway, when was Columbine? 2000, 2001?
April 20th, 1998.
98, before Columbine. So you had a bunch, thank you. You had a bunch of people. This is the beginning of those little incidents. And so Kip was there, and everybody had a big banner out, and it said, why, Kip? Which I think is just, I love that saying. Why, Kip? I mean, first of all, you know the kid is in trouble if your parents are naming you Kip, knowing your last name is Kinkle. You know what I mean? and his sister's name was Chris. And they were all with K's. But anyway, mom and dad are dead. 2 other people are dead. Everybody's dead. And they asked why. And people began to write articles about Kip. Well, what was it? Was he lonely in ex-Serbia? Isolated, looking at too many violent videos? What was the problem of Kip's teen angst? Nobody called Kip a thug. Nobody said, this is the problem with America, bad boys like Kip Kinkle. He was a good kid who just did a bad thing. My boy's charged with killing 1 person, not 5. And he was a thug, and he's the whole black America's problem. This is the reason that this country's falling apart. These thug boys running around here committing all these crimes, going to prison in these incredible numbers. But Kip Kinkle, now I'm not trying to say Kip is a thug and my boy is. I'm trying to say that we never even saw Kip as a criminal, much less a thug. He was just a kid who was misunderstood. Same as the Columbine boys. They were good boys. They were alienated. The black and the other kids, the jocks, and it was an alienation question. It was never a thug or a criminal question. And we don't want to treat these boys the same as we want to treat these bad little bees in life. Now, you know, most of the people sitting in this room really know and feel that Kip Kinkle probably was a good kid who did a bad thing, and that little bee was a thug. And it's that pervasive attitude in this country that has created a culture of racism that we no longer even identify anymore. We're so satisfied with it. We think it's all okay. Now, as to black people, in addition to being 2 million in prison and 50% of that, we have an infant mortality rate that's the same one Dr. King talked about in 1967, and that is double the rate of infant mortality for white people, white children. 65% of the women and children with AIDS are black. We are dying, black people are dying, black men die of prostate cancer at double the levels of white men in America, but actually die at a higher rate of prostate cancer of any men in the world, black men in America. Black women are dying of breast cancer and cervical cancer, double and quadruple the rates of white women. We have the lowest education levels in the United States. I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. We have the highest poverty rates, and less than 1% of all business revenues in the United States come from black-owned businesses. So the question is the same. Why? Must be something wrong with black people. America's a place, I tell you, Vietnamese come here and they make it. Koreans come here and they make it. Everybody can come in America. America's a place of opportunity. Everybody can be president if you really want to. Now, let me tell you something. I doubt that anybody in this room is going to be president. I'm going to just put money on that one right now, okay? Because I don't think anybody here has got the money to roll that hard, okay? You got to have some money up in here to be president of the United States, okay? And all you women, I don't care what you think about Hillary, that girl plays hardball, okay? She's in the old boys club, in the new boys club at that. The question is why then? Why is this true? Is there something wrong with black people? And we had questions like this raised. I know people say, no, that can't be true, but then why is it true? For example, remember when the Bell Curve came out in 1994, some of you may remember this, some of you may not, but the Bell Curve was a book, 800-some page book written by 2 professors who really did not have the credentials to talk about behavioral science, which is what IQ falls under. Because it's not an exact science, it's a behavioral question, but that's another conversation. But the bottom line is, in the Bell Curve, these 2 professors put forward the idea that black people were inherently intellectually inferior to white people. Inherently, biologically, genetically, inferior intellectually to black people. And people began to debate this as though it were true. And they said, well, wait a minute, but look what they proposed. They said, look, black people fail the SAT at such high rates, and white people pass, and they use these tests and various others to say, because of these tests, these Stanford, Binet, and all these other little tests, that black people it's clear, are intellectually inferior genetically. And there's no point in putting any money into public education for us anymore, because you cannot educate these people because they are inferior. And people are like, but why don't black people pass the SAT at the same rate of white people? And some black people said things like, well, it's because the test is culturally biased. Like black people can't read English, they have to have black English, like, who be there? You know what I'm saying? And then we would understand it, right? So it's culturally biased or whatever that meant. And nobody thought that the whole notion, they didn't even start with the premise of what was intelligence. What is intelligence? Well, that would be, we don't know. We don't know what intelligence is. We have no real standard, no objective, no scientific basis for even beginning to discuss intelligence. Now, I always say that I live in Georgia, and in Georgia, if you're a single mom and you have a child and you don't have any money and you go on welfare, you'll get $300 a month to live on. And I figure if you figure out how to get through the month on $300, you've got to be a genius, okay? Because there's no way in hell that anybody can realistically live on $300 a month, even with food stamps and whatever else there is going on with that. So we actually say to ourselves, well, why is it? So the first thing we have to do is realize that there is no measure for intelligence. You know, people they studied, what's his name, Einstein's brain, put it in a jar. Anybody know about this? Put Einstein's brain in a jar, looked at it for 25, 35 years, had the man's brain. I think they just finally got rid of it or did something. I don't know what they did, but they had it preserved in some pickled something, and they examined. No, I'm not making this stuff up. Can I get a witness? Somebody knows what I'm talking about. They had that stuff in a jar. They said, why was he so brilliant? What was it about the brain? Let's look at it, you know, as though they were going to have. And Einstein was almost would have been considered autistic at this point because he didn't speak for the first 9 years or so of his life. And then when he comes up with E equals MC squared, he said, I had a vision about it in a dream. And they were like, what does that mean? He said, that's what it means. So people just, you know, it's a study. Well, what made... So we don't even really know what intelligence is. But now we're going to measure intelligence, though we can't define it, and we're going to use a test like the SAT. And what is the SAT test? Well, it used to be the Scholastic Aptitude Test, as though it measured your ability, you know, aptitude, right? And there was a Scholastic Assessment Test, like it just measured what you could do some kind of way. But ultimately it just became the SAT. We don't even know what it stands for. We just know we have to take it. But somebody says if you don't get a high SAT, you can't get into college. That and a couple $1,000. But unless your daddy gave some money to the school, or you can play football, or your grandfather went there, or your grandmother went there, something like this. Otherwise, you got to take the SAT. You don't get in like George Bush did, you know. You got to take your SAT, and you got to pay your money. Now, I know this is a state school, but I was just at Occidental College. They're up to almost $48,000 a year for tuition. So everybody doesn't care piece together $48,000 a year in a loan or something else. You're going to be denied that. But anyway, so the SAT defines, according to Herrnstein and Murray, the authors of the Bell Curve, defines intelligence, and the success ratio tells us that black folks are inherently inferior. This is almost unbelievable that there was an argument and debate about this. But as a result, policy began to change in this country. And people began to say, well, no child should be left behind. These people have to take more tests. You know what I'm saying? We're not going to put any money into fixing up the schools, lowering the class size, paying teachers more. You know, elementary school teachers being treated like they are babysitters, which actually babysitters should be paid more also, but that's another conversation. You're taking care of somebody's child. Seems like you might want to put a little money into that, you know. I always advocate for elementary schools teachers to have a starting salary of about $150,000 because those are the most important moments in history. Right now, you got my 5-year-old child in there, and you're going to end up having Kip Kinkle or somebody because you got 30-some children to deal with, and you can't deal with all these children in there. You shouldn't have any more than 10 or 12 children in the classroom. You should have some resources that you need and so forth and so on. But we don't do any of that. So here's the bell curve. And so at the end of the day, we find that the SAT test doesn't measure anything. Dr. Richard Atkinson, if you don't believe me, it doesn't matter. But Dr. Richard Atkinson, who was then president of the University of California, who was very trained in this field, said that the ratio between those who passed the test and those who failed the test was very simple. Those who took the SAT test-taking course seemed to do very well in taking the SAT. In other words, as we used to say with computers, garbage in, garbage out. Because the SAT measures nothing other than how well you take the SAT test. Most people who take the test don't know very much about anything. Except for, people even say, that looks like an SAT vocabulary word, you know what I'm saying? As though like, I'm not going to think about it, it's just involving that test, okay? Most of us don't know the history of this country. Most of us know very little, but we can do well. And I was professional at taking these kinds of tests because I went to the kind of school in Philadelphia we were all the special children. We went to little special schools and all this stuff about how I got into there, but there's another conversation. But the bottom line is I did go there, and we took those tests, sample tests, all day long. I'm so good at those tests that years later I took the LSAT, Law School Aptitude Assessment, whatever test, and I came in like the top 2%. People were like, how'd you do it? I said, you know, I could teach my dog Spot to take the LSAT and do well in it. And here's Spot, here's these biscuits. Now look, just go on like this. I'm going to give you a biscuit for every one of these, you know, please. It's a test. It doesn't measure anything. But we began to think that black people were inherently inferior. And even when we heard about the Human Genome Project's results, the results of the Human Genome Project showed that there's no relationship between, certainly not intelligence, behavior, anything else. Most things are environmentally influenced. Most things are environmentally influenced. We have, people thought there would be about 140-some thousand genetic markers, but it turns out there are only 30,000. So after you take away your hair, the color of your skin, your eyes, your teeth, your nose, the fact that you have 2 arms instead of 4, the fact that you're walking on your hind legs or on your legs as opposed to all 4 or something, and you have 5 fingers on each hand, and da, 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 all that stuff, by the time you finish with that, the differences are so few, it's almost incredible. As a matter of fact, Dr. Craig Venter, who was one of the co-directors of the Human Genome Project, suggests that black people in America have a greater similarity to white people in America than they do to Africans in Africa because of environmental influence. Now, I know that's hard for people to believe, but just read about the Human Genome Project. You'll learn a little something there. The next time, we had Bill Clinton coming in, weighing in on this, because Bill Clinton in 1993, in November of 93, said, look, you know, he was standing in the church where Martin Luther King gave his last speech in Memphis, and Bill Clinton is standing there talking about, well, this is the church where Dr. King gave his last speech, and he says, and I'm wondering, saying to all this black congregation, I'm wondering if Martin Luther King were here today, what would he say? People, you know, in the black church we have what we call call and response. So the church said, well, so Martin Luther King said, what would he say? Now Bill Clinton's going to tell us what Martin Luther King would have said, which is amazing to me in and of itself. But anyway, so here's Bill Clinton saying, if Martin Luther King was standing by my side today, what would he say? He would say, I died for your freedom, and look what you've done with it. Talking to black people. And all the people in the audience were like, oh, Lord, look what we've done. What have we done, actually, Bill? And Bill said, look at the breakdown of the black family, all this black-on-black crime, and all of these unwed black mothers. This is your problem. America is not a problem. The scheme here is perfect. Everybody has opportunity. Something wrong with you. You need to fix yourselves and get your families back into shape and stop having all these babies out of wedlock and stop committing this crime. And I'm getting ready to help you. I'm going to pass the 3 strikes crime bill with your help so that you can start putting some of these horrible people in prison who run around your streets intimidating all your people. We're not going to fix poverty because that's your fault. You should have got a job. We're not going to fix hunger. If you had worked, you could have feed your children. There's nothing wrong with America. There's something wrong with black people, and we're going to fix it by putting that. And the next thing we're going to do is a welfare reform bill. And we're going to make sure these lazy girls laying up having all these babies out of wedlock, we're not going to pay for them anymore. We are sick and tired of paying for these lazy girls. We forgot that there were more than black girls because the majority of women who were criminalized by the Clinton welfare reform bill were white women. Poor white women living in the hollows of Kentucky and in the hills of Watsonville, for all I know, you know, wherever, okay? Living around here. So what I'm saying is that Clinton began to shift the design to even something worse in the sense that he created the conditions for people to say, listen, your poverty is your fault. This is not our fault anymore, and America is not going to try to fix any of this stuff. We're not going to worry about any health care. We're not going to worry about any poverty. If you get a job and stop being lazy and trifling, and that's what's wrong with black people, he said then. And then finally we had weighing in during the same period a guy named John DiIulio, who along with William Bennett, the former Secretary of Education, who now has a show on radio or something, whatever, you know. William Bennett and John DiIulio talked about the coming of the super predator, the young black criminal who was worse, and they were big more and more, and they were younger and younger and more violent, and we needed to do something. And so added to the omnibus crime bill that Clinton had was the idea that we're going to put children in prison as adults. You do big boy crime, you're going to do big boy time. That's how they talk. They like to talk tough. Pete Wilson gave us that line, you know. And a person who didn't pass the law school, didn't pass the bar test for about 3 or 4 times, but let me not go into that part about him, because he's no longer governor. We now have a legal immigrant as the governor of California. Don't get confused about the illegal immigrants. But anyway, so DiIulio and Bennett give us the term super predator. And so when we look at all of this, we find that with the Clinton bill and with the DiIulio thing and with the bell curve, we find that there's this notion that these black boys are not only dumb and backward and criminal, but we're going to have to do something to get rid of all these bad boys on the street. And so let's start locking some people up. And then you end up with 2 million people. The prison population in the United States doubled from the time that Clinton put out his, in 10 years from the time of Clinton's, from 1994 to 2004. The prison population doubled. The correct analysis is what we have to look at, and that's what I'm hoping that we'll take away tonight, is that we have to have a correct analysis of things. You know, I had a group of young white, I was at Plattsburgh, New York. I don't know if you've ever been to Plattsburgh. It's the end of the world. The farthest reaches, you know, it really is. It's like, you're in Plattsburgh, you're just living in, I mean, this is just like, it's very poor. Plattsburgh poor. I was speaking at the State University of New York, SUNY, called SUNY New York, Plattsburgh, and all the kids there were like little, like a lot of little Timothy McVeighs sitting out there looking at me like I was crazy. So I'm like, oh, who the hell, how did I get here? So after I made my little speech and everything, these young guys said to me, yeah, you're talking all this stuff about black people this and black people that, but what about white people like me? What about me? I have a middle-class family. My mother and father, they had good jobs, and they worked hard and everything, and I tried to get into a school, and I was more qualified than a black kid, and he got in, even though he wasn't as qualified as I am, because he was black because of affirmative action. Don't you think that's unfair? So he thought that was like a trick question, you know. So I said, well, of course it's unfair. But it's not unfair for the reasons that you think it's unfair. You want me to say that it's unfair because you were more qualified and the black kid shouldn't have gotten in because of merit. But the first thing you have to do is have a correct analysis in order for you to understand what happened. So the first piece of your argument, you have a flawed analysis because the first thing you said was that you're middle class. You're not middle class. You're poor. You'd like to be middle class. You'd like to think, because everybody tries to squeeze into that other category, you know, when it's like black, white, or other. And if you're not really white, you're trying to squeeze into other because you know you don't want to be over there with black people. You know, people who are black and Filipino. Oh, no, I'm more other. You know what I'm saying? You know, if I got anything other than black in me, I'm over there with other because I don't want to be categorized as black, and I know I can't go past for white. And so that's what you are. You want to be middle class, but in fact you're poor. Because if you had $40-some thousand, you could go to Harvard. You don't have any money. That's why you down here scraping with me over this one little slot in the school, down here with some black folks trying to vie for that one slot in school. So what is really unfair is that there is only one slot. There should have been a place for everybody. Why couldn't both of you have gone to school together? Why couldn't we have a society in which nobody has to pay to go and get a higher education? Because we believe that we want to educate our people so that we will know how to vote for somebody who's not going to kill everybody in the world before we all become 22 years old. If we knew how to go to school, if we all went to school, maybe we could be thinking, why do we want to deny people the right to go to school if you don't have money, if you haven't passed the SAT or anything else? Let everybody go. We all went to elementary school. We all went to junior high school. Why is it we can't all go to college if we want to? And so I said, so that's what's wrong. That by design, this is a scheme that says I'm going to pit one white boy against one black boy, and I'm going to say whoever wins, fight it out, duke it out. I don't care because I'm only going to create one more slot. And today it's going to be the black boy slot. And yesterday, for the last couple hundred years, it was white boy slot anyway. Let's just talk very briefly about the history of this country and how we got to this place. Because the reason this is important, now, I know a lot of people's eyes start glazing over when I start talking about the history of the country because they're like, is she going to go into slavery again? Just like, well, you know, as I mentioned, I lived in France. And in 1994, while I was living there was a guy named Paul Toubier who was put on trial. He was he had been a leader, well, not a leader, I guess a leader, but he had been in a hierarchy of the Vichy government. I assume you've studied the Vichy government, probably not. But anyway, that was the government that was sort of the Nazi, colonial, the sort of neo-colonial Nazis. In other words, they were the local French who were supporting the Nazi government after the Germans ran through the north of France. The French said, no more, no more. Some of them fought, but the majority of them laid down and said, look, if you just leave us the rest of France, don't destroy the Louvre, don't destroy Paris, we will allow you to occupy France, which, of course, the Germans did. And in the south of France, there was the establishment of the Vichy government, which was not the French government, but it was the French government controlled by the Germans. And so this guy, Paul Touvier, had been an operative at the highest level, second only really to Klaus Barbie, who was known as the Butcher of Lyon. People know that. I heard somebody say that. Butcher of Lyon. So this guy goes on trial. They find him. He's sitting there drinking wine in Bordeaux, just having a good time. He's about 90 years old now. And so, some Nazi hunters found him, and they brought him to trial in France. Well, the French, being very ambivalent about what their real relationship was in World War II, many of the French journalists and so forth did not want to see this man go on trial because they didn't want to resurrect this history. So we don't need to discuss this history and what we did in France. Well, we had the underground. Really, they had about 4 people in the underground, really. Because, de Gaulle himself was somewhere else other than in France. But anyway, so they put Touvier on trial. The French were like, no, we can't keep on talking about this. He's old. The war's over. Let's get over this. Can't we just turn the page and keep on going? The way we say in America, let's get over it, move on. We don't ever want to look back at anything. And so French prosecutors said, yes, we've got to turn the page of history. You're right. But we cannot turn the page of history until we write the page. We got to look at what's going on in this country. We can't pretend this stuff doesn't happen. That's why we can't understand what's going on. And we're like, well, why can't we all get along? We can't all get along because there's a historical reality here. And so very briefly, we have to look at how did black people come to be in the condition that we're in today? Was this a fluke? Is there some genetic flaw? And if there isn't, is there something wrong in the scheme of things, in the design of things in this country? And we have to look quickly at that. And I just want to revisit some of that history because we have to know that when we talk about, for example, immigrants, now black people did not come here looking for freedom of religion. We did not come in here talking about we want to create colonies for the English crown. We came in here kicking and screaming, being captive slaves from Africa by a scheme of men who were looking to create a market economy and, in fact, did create a market economy so that by the time you get to 1776, you have 150 years of African slavery and a country that is founded as a slave-holding nation. Now, if we don't recognize that, then we'll pretend that that's not true. We'll think, well, yeah, but, so what that Jefferson was a slaveholder and half the people that signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were slaveholders. Matter of fact, more than half. So what? It's still a good idea. These were brilliant men. They were men of their time. So we just go past that 150 years of slavery like it was nothing. And then we move forward to 1865. Excuse me. By the time, the country becomes an independent country, by the way, written into the Constitution, not only is it legal to hold slaves, but it's illegal to try to be free. Biggest crime a black person could commit was trying to run away from a slave master. It was a crime. And it was a crime for white people to help black people to run away. Matter of fact, it was a crime for a white the only time a black man, anything happened to a black man that would be a crime for a white man to commit was when he killed another man's slave. You had all kinds of little codes and stuff going on. This is a country founded on slavery. Now, this is not like, well, it's not your fault. This is not about fault. It's about reality. This is what the country was founded on. This is how it founded, how it developed. It became a market economy. The South Carolina rice planters alone were richer than the majority of the kings and queens of Western Europe at the time once the Declaration of Independence was written. These men had money. Oglethorpe, who was the founder of Georgia and so forth and so on, very, very rich because of slaves, cotton, indigo, sugar, rice, so forth and so on, agricultural economic base. By 1865, we find that blacks, 13th Amendment, the Civil War is over, blacks are theoretically free, the abolition of slavery on the 13th Amendment. Same time, you have the black codes coming into power, and really nothing shifted. There was a moment when General Sherman in 1865 issued Field Order number 15 saying, I want to see all these lands from along this coast, these some miles, 30 miles inland. I want to see all these lands redistributed among the black former slaves so that families at 40 acres of slave families so that each one of them will have something to start their lives with. And what happened? Nothing, because we know nobody got the 40 acre. A few people did. They held on to them. Some of them living in Georgia right now. But most people some people went to those lands, and most of them were run off the lands by the new President Johnson by the end of 1865. And you had the rise of organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, and you had the rise of the black codes, which governed black life. And so black folks went forward through the rest of that year, to the rest of the century rather, basically going to jail because of vagrancy, because they did not conform to the black codes, did not get the 40 acres, did not get any rights. And then after 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, black people suddenly found out that separate was equal. This was America, the beginning of American apartheid. And so we find ourselves coming into the 20th century as basically an oppressed people. We have no land, we have no housing, can't discriminate against housing, can't get a job. All the European immigrants coming into the end of the year, one thing they all learned, whether they were Irish or Italian or Lithuanians or French or German or anything else, they learned they were white people when it came to black people, and make sure that we didn't get a job anywhere on the railroad or anything else. All the unions that were formed by the 20th century were beginning to form together. They were fighting, you know, the gangs of New York and all that stuff. But then one thing they all agreed on, let's not let the black folks in. So black people fought for jobs. We fought against lynching. We fought against the Ku Klux Klan. We fought against all this stuff just to survive. Getting to 1954, we have already in 54, we have little Linda Brown in Topeka, Kansas, saying separate is not equal in public education. And what happens? The Supreme Court says, you're right, let's desegregate the schools. Blood is shed all over the country. Children trying to go to school in Massachusetts and Mississippi can't go to school with white people. White people don't want to see anybody black sitting next to them. Eisenhower himself actually said, it's hard for me to imagine a black man sitting next to a little white girl. You know, it's like the big black buck sitting next to the little white girl, like something terrible is going to happen, all this stuff. This is a terrible moment. You need to know that. People bled and died just for trying to get a little education, thinking if I get an education, I might get a job. 55, we had the great moment when Rosa Parks sits on the bus like Plessy in Plessy versus Ferguson tried to sit on the train in Louisiana, and she's told that she has to sit in the back of the bus. She's not fighting to own the bus, own the land, get a job, just a seat on the bus because I paid the same price. And then we get the voice of Martin Luther King saying America has to be ashamed of itself. How can you have a whole people be denied at this level? And so we get the beginnings of what we now refer to as the civil rights movement in the late 50s and the early 60s, and Martin Luther King finally in 1963, in that great moment in 63, calling for America to come. You know, there was a promise, he says in the beginning of that I Have a Dream speech, there was a promise that has not been kept as to black people. Ultimately, we get the 64, 65 Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, and we find that black people now have, quote, civil rights. And Martin Luther King says in 67, he says, yes, we might have our civil rights, but I'm looking out in America and I see that we have half of what is good, we black people, and double of what is bad. Where do we go from here? Black Panther Party, SNCC, all kinds of organizations began to fight and talk about something. But in the Black Panther Party, we talked about fundamental change, change of design, change of the scheme. Something was wrong. And it wasn't just black people. It was Chicanos, and it was Native Americans, and it was Puerto Ricans, and it was poor whites, because we had a coalition with something called the Young Patriot Party. Kind of like left-leaning Timothy McVeigh's, not to be confused with the SDS and so forth and so on. And we formed coalitions, and we talked about making a change in the scheme of things, because it was that scheme of capitalism and racism that had created the conditions under which we lived. By 1966, we were still an oppressed people, still couldn't get housing, still couldn't get medical care, still couldn't get decent education, and so forth and so on. So the question becomes, when we look over the scope of the history of black people in America, and we can see it more clearly than we can with other groups. Somebody asked me, said, well, you talk sometimes about reparations for blacks. What about the Native Americans? I said, give them the whole country back as far as I'm concerned. I'm fine with that. I'm prepared to go somewhere else, or I'm prepared to pay rent. You know, I pay rent anyway. So I say give every single acre back to the Native people, okay? Then people get scared when you say stuff like that. They're like, are you speaking of downtown Chicago too? You know, yes. And what about, people say, well, what about the Irish immigrants who came here and how they were murdered and killed trying to build this country in the industrial? I said, give them some reparations too. I don't care. I'm fine with that too. Because in the end of the day, as Dr. King called for in the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, which was the real dream he had, and if we really remember, he wasn't killed when he was talking about the 1963 March on Washington. He was killed talking about the 1968 March, in the Poor People's Campaign. Whosoever will, let him come. If you're black, if you're white, if you're Latino, whatever. come on and let's talk about how we're going to Washington and we're going to cash our check, one that's owed to all of us who are poor in this country and sitting here trying to figure out how we're going to make ends meet. And we're calling for guaranteed income, guaranteed health care, and ultimately the redistribution of the wealth of this nation so that everybody can have what he needs. And that's what Martin Luther King talked about, and that was his dream that we have all had erased from our memory. And that was the dream of the Black Panther Party, to change things to the point where we said we want a different world and a better world, where there's a promise that is really kept. And in order to do that, we said we would have to make the kinds of changes and organize. And people called us the terrorists of that time, J. Edgar Hoover. FBI came down on us with COINTELPRO, with guns and everything else. The CIA came down on us. Everybody and their mother tried to destroy the Black Panther Party and ultimately did, because we were calling for that kind of change, and we had other people coming with us, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. So I think the question that I want to close by raising here is just simply saying, what kind of a world do we want to live in? And I think that what we want to do is change the world to such a place that by design everybody does get his or her needs met, and we can get back to the promise and the reality that we have a right to a life of liberty and happiness. Thank you very much. Thank you. 45 minutes. That was 45 minutes. Take your question. All right. Wow. How do the people? Let's take some questions. Yeah, let's take some questions. Is that good? How you doing? Okay, so I got in under 45 minutes. That was pretty good. So let's take some questions. Yes.
Is it true that you are running for the candidacy of President of the Green Party next year?
The Green Party presidential nominee. I'm actually on the California ballot, I find, for the Green Party. So if you want to become a Green for 10 minutes, register as a Green and vote for Brown. Yeah, I am, and there's about 7 other candidates. I don't know how I got on the California ballot, to tell you the truth, but I am on the California ballot. And in other words, the primary. So you have the Democratic primary and the Republican primary and the Libertarian and whoever else, and the Green Party primary. And so if you vote in the Green Party primary, then you can decide who the California delegates will support at the Green Party convention, the way that Democrats. And yes, I put my name in as I have been a member of the Green Party for some time, but I ran for office as a Green in Brunswick, Georgia, where I live, also known as the Confederate Third World. But anyway, that's another conversation. I don't know why I'm living there, but anyway, I did run as a Green, and so yes, I am running, and I've actually gotten some good people here in California who are putting together a California campaign to get people registered as Greens or get people to become Greens so they can vote, for me for the nomination. We'll see what happens. Look, we know what's going to happen, but if I can get that nomination, that's going to be hot news, don't you think? It ought to be fun then. Then it's going to be fun. Yes.
Okay, I'm making up my will, and I'm leaving about 10 acres to the Pomo Tribal Council. I'm leaving all my land to the Pomo Tribal Council, and I'm leaving everything else to whoever would be the best group to do something good for African Americans. Do you have any idea what group that might be, since the Panthers are no longer?
Well, there are probably a number. I mean, I can't say in terms of black organizations because it's a pathetic moment, and it's just like everything else. It's like women's groups. I mean, where are they today? Where were they when the welfare reform bill went down? I don't even know, So I think, though, that there are a lot of young students, and I think that the best thing to do is to talk. I mean, this is why I'm happy to come and talk to young people. As I always say, you're like, quoting Mao Zedong, if you don't mind, that you're like the sun at 8 or 9 in the morning. That's the hope of our people, of all people, is you sitting in this room without you. And I think that you can create that condition and maybe just create an ongoing fund. Find a few people that say, this is what I want you to do with this money that I have. and that I want you to protect it, and so forth and so on. I can remember when a guy I knew named Huey Johnson created something called the Trust for Public Land, if you've ever heard of that. And Huey Johnson went to some people who had a lot of land and said, look, I know you don't want to see all this land polluted because when you die, you know your kid's going to sell it off and it's all going to become, parking lots or something. And so in the interest of that, he was able to get not ownership over, but he had a covenant with them that he would hold their land in trust and make sure that it was always taken care of, and was able to get funding, believe it or not, from like the Bank of America to keep the land up if they had the ownership of the land. And so he got people to will land, believe it or not, and that's how it became the Trust for Public Land. And so I would think that there are any number of young people that you yourself could sit down with and say, listen, I want to see you do something, and I'm prepared to, I would like to do that. I would like to find, there's a lot of young people that I work with right now who are young blacks and Latinos and others, and I can't say that there's an organizational effort right now. I'm very disappointed. It's like the Chinese used to say, I've lived to have an interesting life. It's the condemnation that you've lived too long and it's only been interesting now. So I would like to see somebody buck up and come on with it, but I'm looking for some young people to do that. Some of the people who were in the party and some of the older people, they have done things that have shocked me in terms of their loss of memory and their loss of commitment to anything that we are doing in this country. So sadly, I can't give you the name of an organization, but I think your commitment is wonderful, and I'm sure there's some people sitting in this very room that you could probably work with to develop some little basic thing, like, if nothing else, a school in the neighborhood or a program in the neighborhood. That would be a wonderful program that could be developed out of this very school here. Yes?
I was just going to say, an organization that you want to help, me and these ladies right here, we're part of the Black Scholars United. We're also starting up the first NAACP chapter in Sonoma County. So if you want to help us out, we're looking to grow our organization. It's for anybody. We've made scholarships for our active members, things like that to help with books. We do recruitment programs. We got the academic excellence director, the event planning director, and the financial director. They're all on the board of directors on our organization. We got an agent. I'm the president. You can talk to me. And if you want to help us out, we're always looking to grow.
That's beautiful. And I appreciate you saying that's really what I see everywhere right now. And it may form nationally, but right now there's lots of people doing good work in some communities, and I think that working together, as we who are older can maybe help. I've taken 10 years off of my own age recently. I decided that I just was going to be 10 years younger. When my birth certificate comes out at the end, somebody said, wait a minute, But for now, I'm going down 10 years. And I'm going to stick there for a minute, too. Yes?
I read a quote or a concept that was attributed to you about how some people like Chris Rock, for example, you call them new minstrels or something
Right.
like that.
New age, that would be new age,
New
minstrel.
age.
Actually,
Can you
just,
explain
yeah.
that concept a little
Yeah,
more?
Chris Rock, when he said, first of all, I don't know if you saw that Vanity Square cover. Vanity Square, what am I talking about? What is Vanity? What the hell is Vanity Square? But what is Vanity Square, though? I don't know. Vanity Fair cover, in which he had whiteface on, okay, and a top hat. And but what got me, there were two things that he said. The lesser thing was that he was one of the people who promoted the idea that Clinton was a first black president. I just consider this to be so ridiculous that it's hard for me to even comment on the stupidity of it, okay? I mean, as a funny piece, I don't even know why anybody black would say that, because, but Chris Rock was a big promoter of Clinton being the, quote, first black president. But sadly, Toni Morrison was another one who said it, so. But that wasn't the worst thing he ever did, because we could live past that little ridiculous, because Chris Rock is not he's a comedian. He can't make a commentary about anything. He's just funny, sometimes. And then he talked about how he's the one that promoted the idea that there was a big difference between black people and niggers, So let's go there with him. And, of course, he being the black one, but all the rest of us were like these bad thug boys and all that. But the thing that really made me angry is there was a boy in Detroit, outside of Detroit, Michigan, an 11-year-old boy, Nathaniel Abramson, who was charged with a murder. He shot a gun. I don't know, he was playing around. He was a kid in the hood. Shot a gun up in the air, apparently. Bullet lands and actually kills somebody. I mean, it's like when you shoot, and it hits somebody on top of the head and kills them. And he was charged with murder as a child, 11 years old, went on trial, and went to prison. Now, he actually just got out, amazingly, relatively, did 10 years or so in prison. And when he had his show, he got up there with that woman who has been his little partner, that little teeny woman that's a comedian. I don't remember what her name is. Wanda Sykes, right? And he and Wanda got up there and talked about how that boy should go to prison forever. That's exactly, he knows what he did. And so now here you are advocating the imprisonment of an 11-year-old boy, and you think this stuff is funny, okay? So I was with an organization called Mothers Advocating Juvenile Justice. I said, take it back. You know, that's not exactly how I said it, but it's basically what I meant. And of course, we didn't get a response from that. And so my attitude was that he was totally irresponsible. He wasn't bad enough, tough enough, he committed enough, he had never done anything in his life, and he had gotten there by the blood. The blood of black people is what gave him the opportunity to even be on television. It wasn't because he was particularly funny. A whole lot of people have been funny. Walker and Williams were funny back in the turn of the last century, you know. A whole bunch of folks been funny. He's on TV because people died and fought and marched and everything and had no commitment. So, yes, you're a minstrel. You're walking around here just like every other bootlicking Negro in America. And if I see Chris Rock, just like Bill Campbell, Bill Cosby. Bill Campbell used to be the mayor of Atlanta, who denounced my little boy, talking about this is an evil in our city. Now he's in jail. But anyway... oh, that's right. Bill Campbell's in jail. But Bill Cosby, I'm like, I'm here to fight. I want to duel. You pick the weapons, you know. Fist. I want to challenge you to a duel because we don't need you to denounce our own people. You need to be uplifting. You think that boy is bad? Then why don't you do something to change the conditions under which he's living and so forth? But you want to put an 11-year-old child in prison? Let me tell you what my 13-year-old boy is going through. He's now 24, is going through. He has seen rapes by men of children. He has funded off rapes. He can carry a knife with the best. He had more fights in prison than he ever had. And he said, I wasn't violent when I got here, but I'm violent now. I've seen some boys be transformed. $27 robbery, go in the joint for 10 years in the state of Georgia because they call it armed robbery. If you go like this, I don't have any pockets, but if you go like this in Georgia and you pretend you have a gun or somebody thought you had a gun or you look like the type of person that might have had a gun and you go in and start talking about you're going to steal some money, you're going to do 10 years mandatory time in the state of Georgia, minimum mandatory. I got kids who've been there 14 years old doing 20 years on nothing, and they're not all black. I got a white boy, his mother is a pastor in a church, no less, which really shocked me because she was like, Pastor Nancy, and she has a collar. I mean, she is the whitest white woman in America, okay? And she got a son in the joint. And how did he get there? He had some type of a testosterone deficiency. And I just recently learned a lot about this because there's people who have extraordinary testosterone, people who have less. And so, you know, we all have to have balance of stuff, right? Anyway, so he wasn't manufacturing testosterone. Anyway, he started not to develop as boys do, and he became very afraid of himself as a man. And at 13, I'm talking about 12 and 13. And so he decided he had to walk tough, act tough, and got involved with some blacks who were in a little halfway gang, right? And they, of course, used him and told him to go into the Jamaican store and rob it. You know? And he tried to rob the Jamaicans. Of course, he was not good at this because, in fact, he is Pastor Nancy's son. So he goes in there, takes the gun, and the gun goes off. But it doesn't kill anybody. It goes ricocheting off the back wall, comes up, and hits a guy in the head so small, the velocity was so, reduced, whatever I'm trying to say, that the guy could pick the bullet, you know, it's like it wasn't even hurt him. Even the Jamaican didn't want to testify against him, but he got aggravated assault, 20 years, due 10. You a 15-year-old white boy, you hit the joint in the state of Georgia? He was raped by the first month. And she'll tell you, Pastor Nancy, my son became a bitch for a drug gang inside the prison. My son has been raped, and right now that boy has AIDS, full-blown AIDS, and he is dying, and he's been 12 years in a joint. And you, Chris Rock, want to talk about how funny it is to put an 11-year-old boy in prison? You go to hell, Chris Rock. That's how I feel about it. I'm not, you know, so I challenge him and Bill Cosby to a duel to be so frivolous about serious things. This is the only country in the world that puts children in prison with adults. The only one that we will not sign the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and acknowledge that all children are under 18 years old or under 18 years old. We want to hold children to a standard. You can't drink at 13. You know you can't buy cigarettes. You can't vote. You can't own anything. You can't do anything at 13 years old except go to the joint as a man. And that's why I was upset with Chris Rock. I'm sorry, I know that was a long thing. But it just, if you could see the transformation I've seen in some young men and what the hell they have gone through with older guys. And that's not just the prisoners, it's guards too. You know, you got male and female guards. You know, you got women walking around there selling themselves to the inmates. I mean, it's rough on the range, you know what I mean? It gets real, real deep and real, real rough. And little boys that go in there don't need to be in the joint with no grown men. They need rehabilitation. What about that? What about, okay, what can we do to bring you into being a productive human being as opposed to condemn you to hell? Because when you come out, you really believe me. I'm telling you, these boys, I've seen some boys, they came in, this kid said to me, I was just one quick vignette, and this guy says to me, well, and this is how he talked. This is a black guy, and he was, you know, kind of medium height at 15. But you know how boys shoot up like at 15, 16, they might be 5'2", and then next thing you know, they're 6'8", you know, like tomorrow, you know. This boy hardly grew up. Boy, he's so tough now. And his arm was broken when I saw him recently in prison. And I said, I hope the other guy looks as bad as you do. He said, Miss Elaine, I told those people, this is how he's starting to talk now. He's like, I told those people I don't sell up with nobody. He said, now this is the clean version, of course, because we're here. He said, I don't sell up with nobody. He said, so I had to beat that boy down. I told him, don't come in my cell, and this is what I did. I'm like, who is this guy? His mother was a teacher. He went in there on an armed robbery. Now he's become somebody that nobody messes with. Then he went into the hole for 10 days. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And this guy, David, the white kid I was telling you about, this is how he talks. When I finally talked to him, Nancy said to me, Elaine, I want you to talk to because she has a Georgia accent. I'm trying to get it. She's like, David really wants to talk to you. And so I got on the phone. He said, yeah, how you doing? What's up? You know, this is how he's talking now. And he's rolling hard, and he's big, and he's the predator now. Trust me. And he's got AIDS, and he's dying. End of story. So I don't think it's funny. And I don't think that Chris Rock is in a position to talk about how funny that is. Because even if this boy did kill someone, and that's not to say we just don't want to ignore, we just say, okay, that's fine, you killed somebody. No. But what do we do with an 11-year-old boy who killed somebody? You know, same thing, what would we do if an 11-year-old boy got a hold of a car? We say, who in the hell was supposed to be paying attention to an 11-year-old child? You know what I'm saying? We have a social interest in it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ramble on about that. Yes?
Who is your favorite Democratic presidential nominee and why? And who is your favorite Republican presidential candidate?
Well, I'm really not even thinking about them, but, you know, I don't even have a favorite because all of them, you know, make me sick. I thought you were going to ask me who my favorite rap artist was. Then I'd have told you it was Trick Daddy, Trick Love the Kids. So anyway, but as far as that Obama-Hillary piece is concerned, you know, people are like, is Obama black, you know, so forth and so on. But Hillary, the problem I have with Hillary is that she's Bill Clinton's wife, and that's all she really is in the end of the day. Matter of fact, she was president before, and she's going to be president again. Now, unless they find Hillary with a 12-year-old boy, Hillary's probably going to be president, okay? Even though they have pictures, I've seen some pictures of Hillary at a Black Panther rally in New Haven, and I recently saw those pictures. I was like, who is that? I recognize that face. Oh, my God, I thought it was Bernadine Dorn. I said, no, that's Hillary Clinton. So I see somebody knows who Bernadine Dorn is. But anyway, Weather Underground. So, I mean, I just can't say favorite. I think it's a fun question to think about. But, you know, listen, one of them is going to be president, okay? One of those leading members. My guess is it's going to be Hillary, okay? Unless some really weird thing occurs and somebody really, really fine. Giuliani, I mean, this is the most dangerous person on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. This is a man talking about, I'm going into Iran right now and kill people. And this is a man who did that in New York. And he can't think past his pedestrian limited, this is if he doesn't drop dead of something. He's a very dangerous man, as far as I'm concerned. You know, same thing with Mitt Romney. But Mitt Romney is more interesting to me than some of the other people because he has so much money. And he's smooth as a tack, but he's not going to win. That Mormon thing's going to kill him. And look, this man became the governor of Massachusetts, the Democratic state, okay? And as far as the rest of them are concerned, Barack Obama, my problem with Barack Obama is that here's a man who says the problem with black people today is that we're not voting. Pookie is not voting. My cousin Pookie is not, you know, it's like the ghetto. Barack Obama don't know nobody named no Pookie. He ain't been in the hood lately. He got paid to be over in the south side of Chicago. But he has no relationship to that history. His wife, on the other hand, is a far more interesting person. I say Von Michelle, because she's far more interesting than Barack is, okay? I don't think he has an agenda that I really care about, because I don't think he believes any of what he's saying. I think he really is. But the idea that he really thinks he's going to become president is just incredible to me, that he's that arrogant and that believes that much in himself. But then what does he do? He opens his campaign in Springfield, Illinois, and says, this is the place of Lincoln. And Lincoln freed the slaves and united the country. I'm like, wait a minute, what history book did you read, Barack? You know, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which did not free the slaves, except free the slaves in the seceding states. And nobody black in America believes that Lincoln had anything to do with the freedom of black people. Nobody conscious and black and who has read anything about the history of this country. So for him to identify himself with Lincoln and put all these flags behind, I was like, who is this guy? And I'm not dogging him because I really don't think he's that interested, because he ain't going to win. So I'm not worried about him. I am worried about Hillary. However, I think that in the big scheme of things, that despite her agreement to go to war and all the other things that she's done, that the world won't be worse off with her as it has been with George Bush. And that's the only thing I can say. I prefer a few other people. But I mean, the bottom line is somebody's got to win the election, and I don't think the Republicans are going to pull that off. You know, I just don't think they got anybody that can do that. Giuliani, if he gets a nomination, they definitely won't win. First of all, ain't nobody going to vote for nobody named Giuliani. I mean, just between you and me, America remains really kind of racist. You know what I mean? Giuliani, that's too much. That's too foreign. You know what I mean? And then that stuff with his wife and that kind of weird stuff, you know, that stuff is kind of ugly right there, you know. Both of them been married 3 times. You were going to marry your cousin, but you thought it was your third cousin, but it was your second cousin. But stuff is weird. You know, you put your wife out of the governor's thing and had your mistress up in there, you know. And then what's that guy's name, Fred Thompson, with those jowls, you know. And no, they're not winning. They're not going to win. Hillary's going to be president, and I don't think it will be the worst thing for us at this moment. It might give us a moment to, you know, maybe put some other stuff together, and that's all I'm looking for. Just get that heavy war piece off our back and some of that other stuff. And so I think that's what will happen. She's not my favorite, and I will be voting for her. But people say, well, you'll be throwing away your vote. No, I won't be throwing away my vote. I will be voting the only way I can vote, because we have a democracy here is by mob rule. You know, 50% plus one person. Like, if we all in this room decide we're going to just vote to kill somebody, you know, if there's 200 people in the room and 101 people vote to kill, I mean, the person just dead. I mean, what kind of democracy is that? You know, so we don't have representation. We don't have a lot of things. But given the scheme of things, I don't think it'll be the worst thing in the world that could happen. That's all. Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was wondering if you talked a little bit about the Gen 6, because it seemed like with what happened with those boys, it felt like there was another movement starting and there was some momentum,
Right.
and then it just...
It died because it was a media piece in many ways,
Right.
you know.
What do you think it will take, though?
She asked about the Gen 6. Well, I think that was I know some people that are really trying to use the Gen 6 case to at least galvanize people and say, because people did get excited, but they didn't know what they were excited about. They were just kind of like, was it about the noose or was it about the boys? And I think that, you know, there isn't any one thing, although, you know, you think there is one thing. The Rosa Parks moment, we think, was the one moment that sort of sparked a movement. But it really, she was a member of the NAACP. She knew what she was doing when she got on that bus now. This wasn't like the little old lady from Pasadena getting on the bus. She was like, that's right, and I'm sitting down, I'm going to get arrested, and this is going to do these things. So that was generated by a conscious act, and so I think that was important. But I think that at this point, a lot of students that I've spoken to, and I have spoken to a lot of students, are really genuinely trying to find a way to make something happen and go on in this country. But it's like you can't find your way because you're overwhelmed by propaganda. We don't even see the war anymore. Back in our day, we saw the Vietnam War, didn't we? We saw people actually get killed. We're like, wait a minute, Billy Bob's over there killing people like that? We thought he was just a nice guy with a crew cut, you know what I'm saying? Comes to find out he was a terrorist too. So we became angry, and the same thing with Dr. King and all the people we remember the civil rights movement as film at 11, where we saw people being sprayed with hoses. We didn't know that that stuff was going on in the South. You know what I'm saying? We didn't know that people were being lynched. We heard about it, but it didn't affect us. So what has happened now is the CNN machine and all the other machines are rolling. So you got YouTube and people are making fun. It's like, we can't find anything. We have no information, and it's being, believe me, it's purposely being denied us. So I think we have to just create our own situations where I don't know what's going to take for people to oppose this war, but I can tell you that in November of last year, a whole lot of people voted against the war, and that was impressive. The number of blacks who have joined the Army has been reduced by almost 50%, which is almost unreal, you know. And this is from some people that don't have a job, okay, you know, and still don't want to go to war. So I think there are rumblings of this. I don't know that there's any one answer, but I tell students that, you know, you're here together. We did form coalitions with blacks, with whites, we were the only, Black Panther Party was the only organization that did form these coalitions. And I think it's also important to know that when we talked about questions of black people and we coalesced with Browns and other organizations, we also said that part of our struggle was women's liberation. Part of our struggle was gay liberation. Part of our struggle was people who were disabled. We made a coalition with the Center for Independent Living. And we talked about environmental pollution, not environmental racism, but just how we're going to talk about freedom in a polluted environment. And so all those things played into each other. And so I think if we get back to that and see, like, women thinking of themselves as feminists as opposed to the question of women's liberation and economics, as opposed to the vagina monologues, for example, you know what I mean, spending a lot of time on that, as opposed to going into and worrying about reproductive rights and worrying about this. But to get back to an agenda of freedom, I think that shifts our thinking, and then maybe we can begin to coalesce together. I guess I could take one. Where's the woman giving me the hook? Oh, there you are. Okay, go ahead.
Do you think that we can move forward socially while maintaining capitalism and the economic system in this country?
Well, I think that it's all a process, yes. I think we have no choice. What are you going to do? Where does capitalism exist? It's not just on Wall Street, and it's not in Washington, D.C. There is no space for it. It's like people talking about Walmart. You know, people who have money saying, don't go to Walmart, the workers are exploited, the goods are made by exploited people, you know, people are exploiting all that stuff. Well, when you poor, Walmart's not going to look good, okay? You know, you can go into Walmart, get you a slab of meat, a bike for your kids, some shoes, you know what I'm trying to say, and walk away with about $50. You got wardrobe and all kinds of stuff going on, you know what I'm saying? And people don't understand that. So yes, that's capitalism at its rawest level. But the bottom line is people have to survive. So I think that we can build a movement, as we tried to do in the Black Panther Party. We fed children, and so that took that off the table, you know what I'm saying? In other words, now the capitalists can't make that claim, you know, now we're going to feed them, and people said, wait a minute, we should have been fed in the first place, and they demanded breakfast and lunch, and that's how you get it in public schools. And we had free clinics, and so people said, wait a minute, if the Black Panthers can produce free clinics, how come the government can't? And so people began to talk about more health care, although they, you know, that kind of went off the table also. The point being that we did it piecemeal, by educating people around their issues with concrete programs. And we call them survival pending revolution. So we always knew that we were doing something, but the ideology was to make the big change. But in order to make the big change, everybody had to basically agree to the big change, not the Black Panthers or you or me, because we're like we got the big enlightened peace going on and everybody else is dumb or something. No, without them, there is no change. So we always said that about it. And so, yes, there's a moment at which we will have to figure out how to move from point A to point B, and we call that a process. I guess I can take what? Any more questions or what? Yes.
I just wanted to know what your response to how you feel about immigration rights and where this country has gone with immigrants and pinpointed them, you know, the Minutemen and how that's very well organized and funded. I just want to know.
What's that little independent people down there on the border? Anyway, okay, because in terms of industrial work. But what is happening in this country is the shift from industrialization to technological production, the same way the shift from agrarianism to industrialization at the end of slavery was that you didn't need to slave anymore because you wanted to move to industrialization. You wanted to get rid of that population because you didn't need them anymore. You wanted to move to another thing. And we have moved to that agenda. Now, the Mexicans who come into the United States serve a great purpose. I saw some people just today in Oakland fixing a house, up on some scaffolds and stuff, no kind of safety, you know, like nothing safety, you know, just no helmets, no nothing. You're just going to drop dead if you misstep or if the ladder doesn't work. And of course, all of them are Mexican workers. Now, if you go to Atlanta, where there's a lot of construction, you'll find Georgia has a lot of immigrants coming in. So the game is that how can I make money off of these people, but then get them out of the country when I'm tired of them? Like in Watsonville, where the strawberry workers, the rotation, So let me arrest this group so another group will come in. There's a lot of money and all that stuff going on. So I think what we have to do as people in this country who concern ourselves with human rights and the rights of human beings to make a living somewhere on this planet is to recognize how racist this whole thing is, and that this is about some money right now. This is not about immigration, because half the people here, ain't nobody checked nobody's papers when they came in through wherever that is in New York, the island, like, is it Staten Island? Ellis Island. What is Staten Island? What planet am I on? Ellis Island. When they came through Ellis Island, nobody was checking that. All these people's names got changed, And so this notion of illegal immigrants is it's so fake and so phony. And we have to say that what we want to see. Now, where were the unions? How come the unions didn't support some of these people who are coming in and working and doing real work? People trying to become citizens. I'm like, why are you worried about citizenship? Open up the borders to everybody. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care. I, Elaine, do not care about who is coming to this country in terms of whether they're legal or illegal, having been the descendant of people who came here as slaves and never asked to come here, and certainly didn't come here to get freedom or work or anything else, but were brought under the circumstances that you know of, okay? So I think the immigration question has to be shifted to an economic question, which is what it is. It's not an immigration. It's not a question of are you a legal immigrant. Do you actually want to be a citizen? Who cares? I'll tell you what citizenship gets you. No money. You know what I mean? Here, we've been citizens since day one. Don't have a dime to show for it. Citizenship doesn't translate into a paycheck. You understand what I'm saying? We want to make sure that nobody should be. I see Mexicans in the neighborhoods that I live in Georgia now. I'm paying a very low rent for what I have. I pay $850 a month for 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, 2,500 square feet, living up and down in the historic district, right? The Mexicans living 2 blocks away, paying $2,000 for a 2-bedroom house, 15 people trying to sleep in there. The landlord's not going to fix anything because the landlord knows they're too scared to call anybody about it. So they have to pay the rent on time, or else they get shifted out, and then a new group will come in there anyway. We need to talk about the rights of human beings who are coming here. I don't care how they get here. They're coming here, they're working. People getting paid $1 in Vietnam right now to make Nike shoes, or Malaysia, or wherever they make it Nikes, you know what I'm saying? So it's about the global economy has created this need for the poor workers so that the Americans, quote unquote, can become high-tech workers, and we can have somebody clean the toilets and do the low-level work. And so we want the Mexicans to come in and do it. When I say we, I don't mean me. Want them to do it, but at the same time, we want them to go on back to Mexico because we really don't even like these people, because they're not even trying to speak English as though everybody else was speaking English and anybody else here could speak another language, It's disgusting to me. It's disgusting that we are talking about people as though they are animals, and we are not saying we have got to bring more money and get fair pay. I say that everybody should have been marching so that whether you are illegal or illegal, you're going to get paid a living wage for the work that you do, and you're going to get employed. This is my last question. Is this going to be a nice question or a rough question?
I don't mean to shift the topic from that, and I'm going to.
But I see you're going there. But how bad is this going to be? I wanted to end on a positive note. Go ahead, what?
You could just raise the awareness in the group about the former Panther member who is sitting on death row.
Yeah, well, I can.
Things that like an individual could do if they wanted to just I guess, write in, talk about their displeasure, what's going on, raise awareness about I don't know.
Well, Mumia is one person, and I want to say this because I was asked this question the other night. Mumia was not arrested as a member of the Black Panther Party. He was not in the Black Panther Party at the time he was arrested. And as a matter of fact, we're not sure when he was actually in the party in Philadelphia, but let's say he was in the party. But it was many years later that he was arrested, And his case became political because it became politicized. We have a brother here in California who went into prison as a Black Panther in 1969 and is now 38 years in the joint, who was on death row, got off of there because of the general amnesty in the state of California at that one little window, at that one, his name is Romaine Chip Fitzgerald. And we have a man named Jamil Al-Amin that I'm writing a book about who used to be known as A. Trap Brown, who got life in prison. What I'm saying is I think that the awareness about Mumia is important, but I also want to say that I want people to realize that there are lots of other really serious political prisoners as well as others who are not political, but because of the political scheme are in prison, like the kids who are in prison, even though they committed a, quote, crime. That crime it's a crime because of the political nature of how they got arrested. They're poor. You know, you don't see any rich people in the joint, trust me. I don't care if they're white, black, Mexican, or Native American. They have one thing in common, they're poor. You don't see any rich people in the joint, trust me. They're like one or two in the little federal joint, they're there for 5 minutes playing golf in Law Park or something, and then they get out. So there's a whole other piece that I think has to go. As far as the case of Mumia, there's a lot of people trying to get his case going. I think that people can go online quickly and get involved in his case, and because there's so much to do. There's millions, though, of letters going, you know, marches going for Mumia. But I would also ask that you look up the Free Chip Fitzgerald website and participate in. He's got a parole date coming up in April, and I've got some Brown Berets I just met with in Watsonville. They're raising consciousness about Chip because people have forgotten. I talked to Fred Hampton Jr., and because he does a lot of work out of Chicago with a lot of the other political prisoners that are out there. There's so many. It's so sad, and that's not to put down anyone. Believe me, I'm not trying to diminish the value of Mumia because he has held the line politically. He has been conscious. He has put the material out there. He's raised awareness. He's done that time, and he's sitting there, and he's still facing death, you know. But I got another guy named Sadiq Hassan in Ohio with the Lucasville Five, which is 3 black men and 2 white men who went down on a 1993 uprising in Ohio State Prison in Lucasville, and who are all called the Lucasville Five. They've been on death row since '93. And they were there because, interestingly enough, Sadiq Hassan was, they were going to, it was just like the last straw, but the prison decided they were going to give TB shots to everybody. Well, if you're in prison, you know you don't want anybody to be giving you no needle, okay? You don't trust what's going to happen. So the Muslims who were there said, well, we're opposed to alcohol being put into our blood because we don't drink, and this contains alcohol, so we'll take the test if it's like the sputum test or some other TB test, right? It's screening only, right? And there's other ways to screen. And the warden said, I can't see you, can't hear you, don't care. If you're not ready by Monday, and this was a Monday after Easter, if you don't agree to take these tests, we're going to administer them forcibly. So the Muslims said, well, we're going to shut this wing down. And along with a group, the Black Gangster Disciples and the Aryan Brotherhood, believe it or not, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Gangster Disciples, and the black Muslims, they were not the black ones, but the blacks who were Muslim, in Lucasville Prison in 1993, they shut down the wing and became the longest prison uprising in America. And the result was there were 11 people killed. 10 of them were prisoners, amazingly. And 1 was a guard. The guard, of course, is worth 10 more people, you know what I'm saying? So all of them, the 5 who became the Lucasville 5, went on trial for conspiracy to kill the guard. Like they didn't care about, they knew other people had killed all those other people. They didn't know who really killed. And so this guy, Sadiq Hassan, that I'm specifically working with, he was charged with being a leader. Nobody testified that he had ever killed anyone because he didn't. But they said, you were a leader, and so therefore you probably told people to kill somebody. Even though most of the people who were killed actually were white prisoners, believe it or not. Like of the 11, out of the 10, there was like 7 who were white. Isn't that an interesting story? So I want people to know about those other people. They're sitting on death row, and they need some support, and they don't have it. And although he's on, Mumia has a radio network, and so Hassan is on that network. And so there's a lot of others, and I hope that people will become conscious, though, of what is going on in the prisons of this country and how many people are sitting under the rock for very little. This guy was about to get out, but he's now facing, and he isn't. And the last thing I was going to say is when I visited him in Ohio, I mean, he's behind the screen, you know, glass. The guard is in the back. You're on the other side. There's no touching at all. He's with handcuffs and waist chains and leg chains. I'm like, where is he going? It's like, And he's never visited any other way since 1993. And I don't know how these guys, like mentally deal with a lot of this stuff that's going on. So I appreciate your raising that and I hope that people will say Mumia, free Sadiq, free Jamil, free Chip Fitzgerald. Chip Fitzgerald I like to say because he was my comrade in LA and my friend and my, that I knew. And I talked to him, I wrote him a letter the other day and I said, it's interesting because one of the women that was in the party with us in LA, her son was born just about the time he went to prison, that he was arrested, and has now died. And so, there's been a whole person that has, lived and died to be 35 years old while he's in the joint. You know what I'm saying? A whole lifetime went on, and he's been behind bars forever. And he's still very, very humane, has not lost his humanity. It's really quite incredible. So I hope you look up his case also. Just put his name in Google, his name, and it'll probably pop up to the website. But I would like to just say free all of political prisoners in America, and thank you for raising that. Thank you. Okay, thanks, everybody.